Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the community tick. Brian McGrath and Joel Schiavone have been making New Haven tick since the beginning of time, if not before. Brian has worn many hats in our government and civic life over the decades. These days, his hats include those of the top dog of the Redevelopment Authority and head of the Chapel West Special Services District. Joel rebuilt downtown New Haven into what it is today before anyone had ever heard of the term new urbanism. Brian and Joel are now on the New Haven Redevelopment Authority, where they're fighting the deep state. They're planning to tell us all about that today and talk about retail. Welcome back to WNHA Studio, Brian and Joel. So nice to see you guys and reminisce and look forward. And remember, I'm going to ask you guys to get real close to the mic. Before we talk about the deep state, which I promise we will talk about, I wanted to read you something a reader wrote in The Independent. We had an article about how in downtown New Haven, not at Yale Properties, by the way, but on Chapel Street, there are a lot of vacant storefronts. And at the Educational Center for the Arts, some students painted really nice murals that they put in the windows. And here's what someone wrote. This is lovely. However, the issue of vacant storefronts needs a long-term solution because the changes in retail are real and appear to be permanent. Building in ground-level retail space in new buildings would seem to be an idea whose time has come, whose time is passing or has already passed. There are storefronts at Audubon Street that I think have literally never had a tenant since they were built a generation ago. Someone else adds, great use of empty storefronts with the murals, but I agree. The Jane Jacobs mythology has met the Jeff Bezos reality. We need a plan B for mixed-use development. So here's why I want to put this question to you two guys. You two guys were very successful a generation ago with doing what Jane Jacobs is at least believed to believe should have been done before. She knocked down lots of urban buildings. She didn't like the way urban renewal in places like New Haven tore down historic buildings and got rid of those mixed buildings where you have a store on the first floor and people living upstairs. A lot of that got knocked down. Then Joel Schiavone in the 1980s restored historic buildings, got local people to do local stores and restaurants, and then old folks and young people and everyone between to live on top, and that's why we got the New Haven Miracle. Brian McGrath, you were very involved in the pioneering of the Ninth Square, where we found someone to restore those buildings, fill in some empty spaces. And again, the idea always was stores on the first floor, people living on top, and then they would go to those stores, and that's how you get a good economy. We now have a new situation here. I know there are a lot of factors. Joel has written a really good piece about how Yale is kind of specific. It doesn't want stores going in if it doesn't fit their mission when they own real estate, even though those might be the right stores for New Haven, small local stores. But there's also a phenomenon in the whole country where, whether it's because of people buying things online or creative destruction in industries that change fast, we now have a phenomenon where even in Manhattan, where there are millions of people, storefronts are going empty, and the whole idea, we have, whether we did Science Park or parts of the Ninth Square or other developments like we're doing now on the Hill with Randy Salvatore, we're still always saying apartments above, stores on the first floor, but those stores are going empty. Ninth Square, the stores are empty. What do we do now? What would you do now if you guys were starting out and trying to fix the retail puzzle? What should New Haven do now? How should we think about this? Joel, you go first. And please go close, Joel, to the mic.
As close as I can get, Paul.
Okay.
The essence of the problem is simple, that people are beginning to turn their back on chain stores. And for a variety of reasons, but number one, you use the example of the bookstores are now beginning to become, again, pharmacies are beginning to splurge again. And because people want that small store experience.
Mm-hmm. So I would agree with you that, for instance, we have new pharmacies, 2 of them in Fairhaven.
Right.
The only thing on the first floor of the Novella at Chapel and Howe, all those storefronts are vacant except for a pharmacy. Nationally, independent bookstores are doing well, and New Haven has a couple. We have a new one on York Street. We have the Book Trader. But Joel, that's not the whole puzzle, bookstores and pharmacies. We still have a lot of empty storefronts where I'm sure the owners of 900 Chapel, I'm sure Randy Salvatore would fill their other spaces if they had somebody to fill them, wouldn't they?
No, they're just the same as Yale. If they want a 4-star tenant with all sorts of financial statements, and they don't really want to take a fling. That was the essence of what we did here at the start. Every store that came in, we took a fling. People had great ideas. We liked them. We gave them a chance. And over the years, the Wave, for example, a whole bunch of other stores which are still here.
The expansion of Claire's.
Yeah, and they came in and opened, and they didn't do very well at the start. We subsidized and worked with them and pat them on the back, and finally they started to do well, and they're still here.
But Yale does also give them time. First of all, they did put in the groceries on Whitney and Broadway. I still agree with you. They put many chains like LL Bean. We know that the chain stores keep failing that they put in. They have your same approach of give it time and subsidize it, but for a different goal. Which, would you agree their goal is to have something that looks good in the brochure to attract wealthy students and their families from other places and try to get people out of brochures from the shoreline who like to go to those kind of chains, like the latest one, Lululemon or whatever it's called. I mean, they fail one after the other.
They fail not because of the stores fail, but the whole idea is stupid.
Which is?
Just bringing mall stores into an area like this. It's like Westport. But we're not like Westport. But I think that's what Bruce Alexander thought. We were Westport, and he's created a Westport here.
What do you think, Brian? Now, what you were right on the ground floor, and I would say, by the way, Night Square is a huge success. I think that it used to be totally empty, just like Chapel Street and College were empty till Joel did it. We now have those apartments full. We have mixed income. And we have a great lively scene there, and we definitely have some business done well, whether it's Art Space or the Be Natural guy. He's expanded, he's done well, but most of the places turn over. There's a lot of empty storefronts. I mean, Scapo's done well, Cafe 9 is doing great, Firehouse 12, so it's not like a failure. But there's still this sense, like especially when you go on Orange Street, that last block between George and Crown, those places are still empty more than they're not. Looking back on it, Brian, after the work you did, why do you think that is, and what would fix it?
Well, first of all, we designed.
And Brian, get close to the mic.
Oh, the project was clearly designed around its feasibility, and there clearly wasn't any feasibility for retail on the ground floor.
The developer that you said before the show, the developer actually said, McCormick Barron did the building, said, why are you making us put stores? I remember in your plan, you had one you called the Elegant Pheasant. You were looking for upscale dining. That was my favorite.
Well,
although there never was an Elegant Pheasant.
The city's policy, not to mention the city zoning ordinance, which does require retail on the ground floor in the downtown zone. You're not going to be allowed to put a housing unit on that ground floor.
That's actually in the zoning code?
Yes, it is. And the zoning board will tend to turn you down if you ask for a variance. Because
that's just downtown?
Yeah, just downtown.
Because they're also doing it now on the Hill. They put it in there. They did it in New Harlem and Dixwell.
But it was our policy to do it, and we did it deliberately and forcefully in Audubon Street, and it didn't work out. And we did it wherever.
And that wasn't just Yale's fault, Joel. Audubon Street had two owners before that.
Yeah, it was
They
the
had
city.
the toy shop. I think it was the market. There weren't enough people to go to those stores.
So when we set up the Night Square financing, we made all the mortgage documents work with just the residential rents. Left the developer the option to be very selective on his tenant selection on the retail, and he was very selective. Many retailers were turned down as not fitting or being harmful. It's better to have a vacancy than to get a bad tenant.
But was that good? Weren't they doing what Joel's criticizing Yale for, around let the market say, what do we want?
Yes, they were, and that's what a landlord will do. Why have a bad tenant ruin your whole project? Remember, the whole project
But would it ruin the whole project?
Well, the problem...
Or would it make you adjust to a market?
Let me get to the real problem. The real problem is the city of New Haven, powers that be. You took out 4,000 housing units in I-91. You took out thousands of housing units for I-95. You took out 4,000 housing units for Route 34. You took out 10,000 housing units with the redevelopment agency all over the city, and you never replaced them. And when I was a kid, 1950s, you could not walk downtown as a kid without getting kicked off the sidewalk by fanatic shopping crowds. They were so many
But
people.
things did change. The car downtown, we
no.
made the mistake of imitating the suburbs.
We're not going to blame the interstates and the automobile and the.
I mean, a lot of the housing we torn down was pretty bad housing.
I didn't finish the point.
Okay.
The point is,
Brian.
we had 150,000 people in this town, and we're down to 120,000 because the city doesn't lighten up on the density laws. If you wanted,
we're trying to undo that. We're trying to be a denser city now. We're following Joel Schiavone's example. The whole city's trying to do that now.
And the point of that is, you can't expect a retail store to have any customers when you don't have any customers living in your town. You don't really expect somebody to drive in here from North Haven for one of your small local retailers. It's not going to happen. So, for example, if you want to have better bus service, you look at Chapel Street, the longest street in the city of New Haven, from the river all the way to Hopkins School. There's no ridership on that route. Why aren't there apartment houses on that route anymore? Yeah. We had several, but the city doesn't allow them.
And the bus doesn't even go to Hopkins. It's a terribly designed bus system, too. It's designed for the last century.
Well, it goes all the way out to Chapel Street.
To Boulevard.
Yeah. Now, you can have a lot more ridership if you had some big. Now, remember, we tried to put a very big apartment house out at Stop and Shop. It was turned down. Right behind Stop and Shop in Westfield, a big apartment house was turned down by the city. We tried to put a huge...
You're not talking about Everybody's at Boulevard in Whaley?
No. I'm talking about Larry Liebman tried to do a really big one right out behind the Stop and Shop.
In Amity?
In Amity. And it was turned down by the city. We also tried to put a really big one at Boulevard in Whaley. That was turned down.
Okay, let's talk about stuff, though, in the time frame that some of our listeners have been alive for.
All I'm telling you...
Because we all agree. I mean, the three of us agree. I didn't used to agree with you, but I agree with you now. Everyone agrees density. Everyone agrees we need that mixed use.
Well, there you go. Let's get some population back in the city of New Haven, and you might have some local customers.
But we are gradually growing again. There's no question about it.
40 years is a little worse than gradually.
But no, in the last decade, it's only New Haven and Hamden and Connecticut that have grown.
Well, I always was fond of saying that the city government is on a glacial timeline.
But other people say that government shouldn't always work too fast because then you have unintended consequences like, Brian, what you just brought up.
Exactly.
When they tore down tens of thousands of housing units because for that 5 minutes they believed they had the right architecture and the right idea about being like the suburbs. Patricia Kane writes in, great information from all of you. Thank you, Patricia. And you're identified as an anniversary follower of the show, one of our favorite listeners. You're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM. We got two people who between them have had more of an impact on the city than just about any two people you'll find in New Haven, Brian McGrath and Joel Schiavone, and they're talking about the New Haven redevelopment strategy now in a new era. Did you know this morning I went to the unveiling of New Haven Bank? It used to be called Start Bank. It's been around only 9 years. It's a community bank that got started with proceeds from the demutualization of New Haven savings. We no longer have any banks in New Haven that are owned and centered here, except for that single branch of what was called Start Bank, and as of today is New Haven Bank at Whaley and Sherman. Joel, you've gone to a lot of bankers in your day to get loans or not get loans. Brian, you've negotiated with a lot of bankers to support development in New Haven. How significant is it that we now have a New Haven Bank again in the 21st century? Let's go first with Joel.
They're nice people, but it's a terribly small bank. It's not going to have any impact for a long period of time.
You know, they have grown. They've made money for 4 years. They want to grow gradually the way New Haven Savings did. And they say that their average customer gets a loan of $300,000 to $500,000. They say all the other banks really don't look at you until it's $1 million. So their examples are people, if you're a small manufacturer, if you're a landlord who wants to upgrade some property and rent it to Section 8, which we could have pros and cons of that. Joel, why doesn't that make an impact? Isn't that a little bit Joel Schiavone-ish that you want to have local people build up small enterprises into a larger mosaic?
Well, I have a loan from that bank.
You do?
So
did you pay it back?
So far.
What was the loan for, Joel?
I can't guarantee it beyond the next few years.
What was it for?
For a development I did on Chapel Street, 1255 Chapel Street.
So this is some nice work. Brian?
Well, Chapel West always kept its money in George Perez's bank, and until he moved on to the state, before he even left, we moved the money to John DeStefano's bank.
We call Start Bank now, New Haven Bank. You call it John DeStefano's bank.
Obviously, it's not John's bank, but he's the vice president, and it's our local bank. And Chapel West keeps their money there. My Greater Dwight Development Corporation, which I'm a board member of, keeps our money there, and we know that we can go there for a loan anytime we want. Not a problem. We will get the loan because John trusts us, and we trust John.
So you're a little more optimistic than Joel Schiavone is about the impact of that bank, even though Joel just gave an example of a kind of person who gets a loan because he's a local guy with a track record whom they knew.
It's
just to be fair, Joel.
But it's designed. I truly believe it was designed to be a small local bank, and it's going to do small loans for small retail and small businesses that can work.
Right.
Obviously, they won't all work, but most of them will if you're a good lender.
Joel, do you still live in the neighborhood there?
I live in University Tower.
Oh, that's right. You told me that on the way in. So you're half a step from there. Yeah. Joel's Mr. Downtown. That's what they used to call him. Or Mr. Crown Town.
I'm still Mr. Downtown.
You're still Mr. Downtown. And
no one knows it.
and you also own property, don't you, in Chapel West?
No.
Oh, you used to?
Not now.
Okay. But in any case, both of you have been involved in that part of town, which is part of the Dwight neighborhood, part of West River, part of the western part of downtown. We're talking, I think, when we talk about Chapel West, which I think was a neighborhood invented in the 1980s by a woman named Evelyn Schatz, who had a furrier shop and was sort of like the dynamo who nobody said no to when she wanted something to improve her neighborhood. And the merchants create a special service district, which is a kind of, in our lifetime, is a new phenomenon where merchants in a whole neighborhood, a commercial neighborhood, band together, and they agree to pay an extra tax, which they call a levy, to fund keeping their neighborhood clean and make improvements in the neighborhood. Is that a fair way, folks, to describe a special services district?
Except for the extra feature, that it's really a promoter of development in every way. By being partners with the city, we can affect a lot. And we had one of our board members, in fact, was what you would call a market failure. He owned that property.
Which property?
Where Randy Salvatore built the Novella.
We're talking Chapel and Howe.
And nothing was going to happen there. It's going to sit there and rot for years because he didn't need the money and he wasn't moving on it. And he left our board. And he was one of those properties we had targeted to ask the city to have the redevelopment agency take the property.
By eminent domain.
But Joel brokered the sale. And if it wasn't for Joel, it probably wouldn't have taken place. And it happened and solved all the political problems as well by moving a historic house and making everybody happy. And the zoning board approved it.
It's funny how in New Haven we do things.
Well,
we have our own way, which I kind of like.
Yeah, but
it makes it like a novel or a play.
Well, these are the same things that the city agencies are supposed to do. And when they can, or when they know what to do, they will intervene.
So we have other special services districts. We have Whaley, for instance,
right.
Fairhaven. I believe one thing that's unique to yours is the banners you guys came up with of famous New Haveners. Was it Paul Giamatti, Meryl Streep? You have, was it Noah Webster?
Yeah,
people you didn't know grew up in New Haven. You have their banners up on buildings throughout that area, and people love them. They tell you a little story, baseball players who came from New Haven. And what I was surprised about was you've done it now, 4 years?
What's that?
To have those banners up?
At least now.
They're in good shape. At first I thought, Brian, here you guys are putting up banners. But is it the same banner that you replaced?
We replaced the same banner. If it falls down, we've had them stolen and sometimes.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They stole Chad Dawson's twice.
Chad Dawson's got stolen, the boxer. That's kind of funny. But Joel, what do you think of those banners?
I think whatever you can do to liven up the street is going to help you in the long run. And that's what they've been trying to do.
Now, Brian, are you the chair of the Redevelopment Authority?
Yes, my colleagues have generously elected me chair.
And Joel, you're a member of the Redevelopment Authority.
Yes.
Right.
Now, that's a government body that is it's not a salary that you go on that. It's one of those many boards and commissions we have that review the work of public officials.
We do not do that.
What's the authority? What is it? Because we have a development commission that reviews the work.
The development commission is not an authority. It doesn't have powers to do
so. What's your powers?
Our main and only power really is to allow the city of New Haven to use its powers of eminent domain under state and federal law. The city of New Haven cannot use eminent domain for economic development purposes unless it follows the procedure mandated by state and federal law. And the Redevelopment Authority is that body that's mandated to carry out those procedures.
So if city officials want to take a property by eminent domain, they have to go through you.
They simply go through us, except that they go through us in order to enact the plan, but the plan also has to be enacted by the Board of Aldermen and with advice from the city plan.
And you're
commission.
talking about a larger plan or the specific plan for eminent domain?
This is the beauty, and the state of Connecticut has got to be the best state in the union for doing redevelopment. It has the least political interference and foolishness and nonsense in the law. It's so flexible that a municipality in Connecticut can do redevelopment their way. And like you know, when we try to talk about redevelopment suffers from the Lizzie Borden concept.
And what's that?
It's like the axe was a wonderful tool. It cleared the West and built America. But every time you mention an axe around here, you've got to listen to stories about Lizzie Borden. We are not interested in what the redevelopment agency did in the 1960s. That wasn't us, and we're not going to do it.
Brian, we just skipped something. I think we have told our listeners what this is all about. That's okay. I just want to explain it for a minute. So in the 1950s and 60s, New Haven cleared a lot of land. That was a nice way of saying it knocked down a lot of historic buildings, some of them in bad shape.
Speculatively,
right.
Without a development.
Cleared tons of land to rebuild, and then the whole world felt like we made a big mistake by destroying so much of our built environment and community, which is when Joel rode to the rescue and came with this new idea. But the boogeyman that you're referring to, the Lizzie Borden, was the redevelopment agency and the redevelopment authority had so much power built up under Frank Logue's brother Ed that they used to just decide we're going to knock down all these properties. So we kind of have PTSD in New Haven. People say, big government, don't come just grab our buildings and knock it down. Clarence Thomas had a famous dissent in the Kelo case at the Supreme Court, saying you shouldn't use economic development ever as a reason for eminent domain because that gets fudged. He called it Negro removal, but I mean, it got fudged as a way to help some people make money and call something blighted when in fact it's going to have value because some big corporation or some government person wants to do it. So there's all these reasons in New Haven that people are worried about you taking property.
Exactly.
And also the redevelopment agency, all their people got taken away. When you, Brian, and other people started coming in government in the 80s.
Used to be on the redevelopment paycheck in the old days.
And then Joel Schiavone, when he was building, everyone said, boy, they did everything wrong. They went from the biggest bureaucracy in town to having only one employee who was the director, and they shifted all the power elsewhere. So, in fact, the authority you have now barely meets and doesn't get asked to do anything.
It's a
vestige, but you want to revive it.
We are not a vestige, and we don't need to be revived.
You don't want to be a vestige. You want to put it to use.
We exist as it is. Now, we are departing dramatically. We have already written our first redevelopment plan that we want to put back in place is radically different from the way they were written in the old days. Number one, we have put veto power into the plan deliberately on purpose for the neighborhood groups. No project will go forward in the Dwight neighborhood under redevelopment without the say-so of the Dwight Development Corporation, the Chapel West Special Services District, the Whaley Avenue Special Services District.
So you're worried that one person could hold things up when it might not be in the public interest?
Why on earth would we want to do a project in that neighborhood that the neighborhood doesn't want? We don't.
Who's the neighborhood?
The neighborhood is those bodies who are duly elected to represent the property owners in those neighborhoods.
And property owners are the neighborhood, not tenants.
That would be Chapel West. No, tenants are represented by the Greater Dwight Development Corporation and by the management team.
Yes, they are.
We appeared before that management team 2 times and got a unanimous standing vote of everybody there in favor. You were there. And so we don't see the slightest problem.
So did the plan get approved?
The plan has been approved by the redevelopment agency and handed over to city staff to be conveyed to the city plan department so that the city plan commissioners can hold their public hearing and solicit public statements.
So it's okayed by the management team and by the Dwight Development Corporation.
And the Whaley District and the Greater Dwight Development Corporation. And they are written into the plan by name. And some government people are worried about letting the neighborhood have that kind of control. And it's not a problem, really. You do not want to go. We're not planning to tear down the whole neighborhood and speculatively take the land. Look at New London. They speculatively bought all that land, and then a developer failed, and nothing ever came of it, and all they created for themselves was a political problem. And by the way, nothing about what New London did was illegal in any way. It was basically a misuse of an axe. And you have to blame your own municipality.
So what's happening now? They won't advance yours to city plan?
It hasn't gone to city plan yet. We can convey it ourselves to city plan, but we need the city staff because they're the ones who have to carry out all the work. I mean, Joel and
So what
I
are they telling you? What's the staff do you need? The development
the
authority?
development administrator and whoever he directs. That's all.
And what have you said to them? We got this plan. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, well, they're generally agreeable to someday submit it and get the ball rolling, but they have lack of staff, they have lack of interest, and lack of understanding. I'm
and
saying,
what would this plan do? What is your new plan? Maybe Joel can explain it.
Sure.
Joel, what is the new Dwight development plan? It's the Dwight development plan?
Well, it's
I'll give you a broader context, Paul. Throughout the United States, not just here in New Haven, they have a number of these so-called development agencies, which basically identify blighted property, put together a plan for that building, find a developer who will restore the plan, and then turn that over to the developer to rebuild it.
exactly surgical projects.
It's surgical. That's Brian's term, not mine. But,
Well, you know what I mean.
but
One at a time.
I sent Brian yesterday. I'm happy to send anybody who wants it a report from Savannah, which has so far have a group like ours who has restored 400 properties just by going after places that are blighted.
Taken by eminent domain.
Taken by eminent domain.
You need money to pay the person the fair market value.
Right.
The developer. See, we're not implying a subsidy here. If this project's not feasible, we may not do it.
And so do you have specific properties you're looking at, Dwight? Are you looking at these big
no,
landlords who have all these slum properties?
Not at all. Not at all. It's a generic set of standards that if you can't meet the standards, you are offensive to the neighborhood, and the neighborhood will speak up about that.
What are some of those standards?
You have to keep the zoning code, the housing code. You cannot be continuously having LCI come and write you up and give you fines. You can't be one of those landlords who makes a living by breaking the law, which is what a lot of landlords do. They provide no services, no repairs, no maintenance, no nothing, and they make a big profit that way. And eventually, they may deteriorate the building down to the point where it becomes
What would be
abandoned.
examples in your neighborhood of that?
In my neighborhood has a few examples, but we had one on Edgewood Avenue, but the Dwight Development Corporation stepped in and bought the property and renovated it with some chaffa money and sold it.
What about Orchard and Chapel?
Orchard and Chapel. At Orchard and Chapel, there's no problems. That's a completely.
You knocked down the building. You got them to knock down the building.
We did not get them to knock down the building. Pike bought the building and found it to be unrepairable, and they knocked it down.
So you haven't had problems with Pike?
The only problems with Pike we have are maintenance problems. There's not cleaning up. There's not maintenance.
That's funny, Brian. I got a big sense that your group was very upset with Pike.
What I just say. Maintenance, not cleaning the property is a way to save money, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to make a profit by breaking the city's rules.
Okay.
We don't like that.
So we're listening.
Let me point one thing out,
okay,
which people don't seem to realize. The 9th Square was a redevelopment project, 100%. Redevelopment agency did that project. And there was 35 properties identified to be bought and renovated. And 17 of the property owners said no. And guess how we got title? We took them by eminent domain and conveyed them to the developer. They agreed. They didn't agree with us. We had to take them by eminent domain. You could not ever do a project like that without eminent domain. And then when Daniels became mayor, he made me executive director of the redevelopment agency, and I carried out and finished the 9th Square project as the redevelopment director.
Now, I remember you standing on a sidewalk
and development administrator
and laughing at a woman who had a Greek diner.
Oh, God.
Angie's, who was being evicted because she wasn't going to be part of the new 9th Square. Any second thoughts on that?
That was after we had to arrest her husband for coming out with a rifle and trying to kill one of our building inspectors. That was after she sued us, claiming that we gave her herpes of the eyeball by stressing her out. She sued the city for
What's herpes of the eyeball?
We had no idea, but she sued us for millions of dollars. And
who won?
Well, she sure didn't win.
Got to look up herpes of the eyeball. But in the meantime, I'm going to remind people that they're listening to Dateline New Haven.
Besides, she wasn't the owner. That was her main problem. She was a tenant.
WNHH FM, live streamed at 103.5 FM and NewHavenIndependent.org. We're talking to two people who have made New Haven what it is today and are talking to us about what it can be tomorrow. Brian McGrath and Joel Schiavone. So where do we go next with the idea of first floor retail? Joel, I think, is saying encourage local small businesses for storefronts, Joel, and defy what Yale's trying to do with this mall generic approach? Is that what I'm hearing, Joel?
The only thing that works is in the neighborhood retail.
And give me some examples besides you talked about bookstores and you talked about pharmacies.
Neighborhood retail is defined very simply if it's owned and operated by the same guy, same gal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a chain store. It's not run by somebody from Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
The person who owns the store is inside. When you walk in, the owner is there, and you can talk to them. And that how it's defined.
But Joel, and again, we would all agree with you, Joel. But do you think there is a complicating factor with the internet? Do we need to find some new formula for what kind of retail will work and what won't?
Yeah, well, that's what.
I mean, hey, it's not up to us to find the retailer. It's
the retailer. We have to welcome the retailer who's trying out the idea, and Joel says nurture them. Right?
So you don't think like a government person. First of all, one of the reasons you can't always get a retail in there is because the rents are too high, and one of the reasons the rents are too high is the developer can't make any money. And if a developer comes to the city and says, listen, I need relief. I want to do 18 units here. The law says I can only do 11.
So you can get denser.
If you let me do 18 units, I will subsidize the retail that you want me to do. No problem. I will keep the rent low. We keep the rents low in the 9th Square for the retail in order to get retail.
But then you are artificially steering the market.
You have to. Until you have enough population to support your retail. What are you going to do? Yes, the internet has taken all your business.
And how much population do you need more population than you used to because of the internet? That's what I'm thinking. So 9th Square, you got hundreds of apartments filled. It was like 400?
It doesn't matter. In the whole
but you still couldn't support a lot of storefronts on that.
You have far fewer people living in the downtown today than you did in 1950.
But a whole hell of a lot more than in 1980.
Well, that's certainly true.
So I don't know. You're saying we need the old numbers, or I'm just wondering. So Joel didn't get to finish his thought.
Okay.
First of all, you have no choice. You can look around. Chain stores are just simply not going to work.
Yeah.
People.
But how about that olive oil store that Yale brought in that lasted 7 minutes? That was an olive oil chain for very expensive olive oil. That was my favorite one.
It's too bad students don't cook in their rooms, so they didn't need the olive oil.
But also, you can't afford, the kind of olive oil.
But that's not true. People go out to Whole Foods and they buy that kind of olive oil.
Okay, what were you saying? But like Edge of the Woods has a lot of that kind of products that sometimes cost more, but they cost a lot less than Whole Foods. Not necessarily than Trader Joe's, but than Whole Foods.
Mm-hmm.
But Joel, we got to let you finish here.
The problem is that we don't know what the hell the retail is going to be in the future, because we are surrounded by people who will not give anybody with a new idea a chance.
Yeah.
And
what the hell is that?
Is that yours, Brian?
I don't know what that is.
So you're saying give people with a new idea a chance?
We have a very inventive population here, particularly with Yale here. People have inventive ideas. They should be encouraged to use them, and that's exactly what we did.
Now we do have the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute, right?
Yeah, but that's for tech, high tech.
Right. Well, tech is a big growing field. That is some of what's happening.
Well, it's not a retail field.
Oh, not a retail. Now, Juwan Carter, thank you for listening, Juwan. I love when you send in your questions. Here's what Juwan writes for you guys. Any ideas on getting local people involved who are willing to meet the lower economic threshold to gain a state of equity? Too many families with a net worth of $4,000 or less. He's talking about net worth, Juwan, and thank you for the question. Especially in the African American community, I believe it's 5 cents or 10 cents on the dollar in terms of how much the average black family in America has in assets compared to the average white family. And I believe Juwan is saying not about who has the biggest salary, but who has the assets to invest in a business. Joel, any thoughts on that?
It's not the assets that you need; it's the idea you need, and the sophistication of the person who has the idea. We supported a large number of people for years because we had faith in them, and they ended up doing a good job and staying forever and paying rent.
Well, who would be an example of that, Joel?
Wave.
Uh-huh.
Wave started out as a small
right in the tail
boutique and went to become a chain store. Or chain store didn't really work, but now they're back in New Haven again. What stores are left from there? The other one.
The expansion of Claire's. You also supported the Owl Shop, correct? Which has done well and reinvented itself as a jazz speakeasy with grandfathered in smoke.
Actually, that's the one building you never got to own, isn't it?
No.
You did?
You didn't own the Roger. Oh, you did own the Roger Sherman Theater one too, right?
Sure.
Huh?
And you did the Anchor, but the Anchor did eventually go out of business. Now it's been reborn as the Anchor Spa with very, very expensive drinks.
Maybe the Anchor was the one you didn't buy. Wasn't there one store that you
I'll
did?
tell you a funny story about the reversions, which may be illustrative. The owner of the Anchor came to me and said, I'd like a new lease. I said, why do you want a new lease? He says, because I want to redo my store. And I said, I'll give you a new lease, but you can't redo the store. He said, why not? I said, it's perfect the way it is. Why would you want to redo the Anchor? I said, it does great. Certain population, certain kind of demographic, and it'll work forever.
A pretty broad graphic, but people
Right.
who like some kind of genuinity of experience and not
Right.
spending half their income from the week on one drink.
Exactly. And then they sold it to someone else, and he went ahead and created a upscale kind of place, and it hasn't done very well.
They said it has not.
No.
That guy was a Yale graduate they brought back from Harlem.
No, I went there once. It was $14 for a drink. And
Yeah, I've never gone in because I've never gone in
again.
because of the price. Same with Elm City Social. I mean, these places are supposed to be great. I just can't spend that kind of money. But one place that has been very successful is, and this was Joel's original vision, across the street from the Schubert, when they rebuilt the Schubert Fusco as part of Joel's district. Joel redid an old vaudeville and movie house called the Roger Sherman Theater and called it the Palace. That eventually went out of business, but I think I'm very impressed with, I don't know what you guys think, of kind of scrappy guys who took it over.
Yeah.
And they've made it into a very successful concert hall. Yale tried to block it forever.
Yes.
And then when Tony Hart became mayor, they found out through old drawings and old plans that there was a way you could get around Yale's efforts to block them by finding a new method of egress from the building to meet the fire code. And then in about 7 minutes, they fixed that place up. I was in it the day before their first concert, and it still wasn't up to code, and they just threw down. That is a wonderful place to see. Have you guys been there?
Yeah.
That doesn't require a local market.
My son works there.
Oh, your son works there.
Yeah.
Now, your son's a musician, right, Joe?
Yeah.
He plays bass.
Yeah.
And you're a musician. You play banjo.
Yes.
Joel, you were what, in your 80s?
Just barely, though.
But I know that you've been up there late at night at Pacific Standard Tavern on Crown Street to watch your son play.
Yeah, I have
And
been.
you still have some of your hearing. So tell me about that generational torch. Now, you have a son who's in his 20s,
Yes.
and he's working at the College Street Music Hall in the district you built.
Yeah.
That was empty. He's playing at a club called Pacific Standard Tavern that has
Right.
live music all the time. How does that feel to see sort of the next generation bear the fruits of some of what you did?
I don't have a problem. My ex-wife has a problem with him being big.
No, but I mean, isn't that kind of
being a
fun for you to
musician.
see this dead area
for me
of
it
town
is.
that became so lively, and you're seeing
Yeah.
your own son be part of it?
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
Maya McFadden joined us. Irv Pinsky joined us. Thanks for listening, everybody, to Dateline New Haven. So let's go back to slumlords. We talked about people who aren't keeping the property up. One way you talked about dealing with it in your capacity as redevelopment authority leaders is to have a new joint plan that made it easier and specifically possible for the government to take away property from repeat slumlords if the neighborhood agrees. Have you put too many steps in, Brian? Because when you were in government, you hated all those steps. You used to just get in people's face and
you got
take
it
their
all
cars.
wrong. You're misunderstanding whatever we said. We put 0 steps in.
You got to get a vote from Dwight Development. You got to get a vote from Whaley Development. You got to get a vote from Greater Development. Dwight, you get the management team.
Today, you don't put things through the Board of Aldermen or the government today that doesn't have neighborhood support.
I agree.
It
that's
doesn't
one thing we learned.
work anymore.
Yeah.
The neighborhoods are getting sophisticated, and they want problems solved, and they're not getting that from the government. You have police powers, which gives us all the building codes, the zoning codes, the fines. All of that foolishness doesn't work against a determined thieving landlord who makes his living breaking all your rules. So let's suppose a landlord commits a zoning ordinance violation. He gets a citation. The next day he does it again. He gets another citation. He can do it 30 days in a row and get 30 citations. But guess what? He keeps doing it. You don't have any real control over properties ultimately from a determined thief other than site control. If you don't own the property and give it to a responsible developer, it's never going to be done right. All the fines in the world, $25 a day fine is a joke.
100 a day. It's $99.
It doesn't matter. You think that $100 a day is ever going to
It goes pretty fast.
It's not going to ever be a big enough lien to foreclose. And if the property has any value, when you get up to a certain amount and you go to foreclose, he simply redeems.
I'm not saying you're wrong, Brian, but I know of cases where the city had the fines built up so high that they couldn't get the bank to unload a bad property.
Well, that's true. I mean,
until they agreed to waive the fees.
We're trying to support LCI.
That's the Livable City Initiative.
Livable Cities Initiative has a concept where if they could get some money, if they could get a pool of money, whenever they see a rotten property, usually a foreclosure, which is on its last legs and it's being foreclosed because it hasn't really got an owner anymore or no one who wants to pay the mortgage, they would like to buy that and fix it up. If they were to use the redevelopment agency in that process, all they would have to do is find a developer who sees that that property is feasible. If the property is feasible, a redeveloper would be willing to pay fair market value.
And they have two other boards too. They have an LCI board, they have Property Disposition Committee.
And they don't have any authority to do what needs to be done, which is to find the developer, make a contract with the developer where, same as the 9th Square, where we agree with the developer that if he puts up the cash, we will acquire the property if he redevelops it according to our standards. And put in the reverter in the contract that if he doesn't live up to his contract, the property goes back to the city of New Haven and he loses his money.
Okay, so Brian McGrath and Joel Schiavone, before we leave, I want to talk to you a little bit about another factor in rebuilding a city, and that's traffic and parking. A lot of theories. We've done a lot of new stuff in the division that Brian first became famous for running, which was traffic and parking. He loved giving parking tickets. And now we've done a lot to do, like we have these new kiosks instead of meters so that, you got paid one spot on a block. You have an app so you could be at dinner and refill the meter. We're going to this process where you get charged more at an in-demand space, at an in-demand time, at a less demand space. Let's start with Joel. Are we making the right 21st century moves to parking, or is there a 19th century move we need to make? How is our parking strategy working, and how should it work?
Parking strategy is based upon 1950 plans when an awful lot of people worked downtown. And the whole purpose of it was to get people into town and out of town fast. Have to really rethink this as a downtown, as a walking downtown.
Right, and we have kind of embraced that, right? We want the streets to go slower. We're doing traffic calming and that kind of stuff. But what about parking? Like, should we block off streets downtown to traffic altogether, to cars and parking altogether?
That is such a complicated question.
Yeah,
argumentative.
Yeah, you just did three.
No, I wasn't arguing.
Things.
I was wondering.
No, you're not arguing, but trying to get something like that done in the city.
You're mixing three different.
Because they did it in Burlington, Vermont, very well.
Yeah, well, that's a small town.
You're mixing three different concepts here and getting confused.
All right, let's unconfuse us.
What Joel said about the 50s is right. We had a lot of no standing zones that were clearing the cars out of there by 3 o'clock to allow flows of traffic. We have more than 50% eliminated those over the last several years, and they're still eliminating those. We don't take away good parking spaces anymore to let people leave the city at 5 o'clock. That's one concept. The concept of giving tickets and everything, that hasn't let up in any degree. What has changed is to make it easier and more efficient for the customer to pay, yes. But parking fees are a means solely of rationing the spaces available. You cannot afford a parking space for everybody, everywhere, every time he wants it. It's impossible. You would be taking up all your real estate and it would be empty 90% of the time. So what you do is you have just enough parking, but you have to pay for it. And at peak hours, you have to pay more. If you're in a place that has high demand, you're going to have to charge you an extra $1 an hour. And that way you weed out the people that are able to walk 2 blocks that want to save the $1 can walk 2 blocks and save the $1.
Joel, any other thoughts on parking?
No, parking will emerge by itself.
Yep, it does.
And would you have any final thoughts, either of you, before we say sayonara?
Well, the only final thought is a thought I sent to you in that memorandum today about Yale. if we continue to allow Yale to run a mall downtown, we're going to be destroyed.
Ooh, that's kind of a good scenario. If we continue to allow Yale to run a mall downtown, we're going to be destroyed. Brian McGrath, what do you think?
I don't have a problem with Yale's Mall.
Why not? Where do you disagree with Joel?
I'd rather see the stores occupied than not. I'd rather see Yale having a constant, daily, vigilant interest in all the surroundings around their building. I appreciate the Yale police. Like they police my district so well that I don't have to pay them, and they do whatever I ask. And so I consider them a boon to the Chapel West neighborhood. I don't know what their effects might be elsewhere.
But you guys agree, small, local retail?
Yes, of course.
And you agree updating the authorities of the retail authority to have the neighborhood help you get properties from irresponsible landlords?
Yes.
I think we came to agreement, guys.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's a special treat for me because I followed you guys a long time, argued with you guys a long time, and I've learned so much from both of you. I admire the work you've done and your commitment to the city of New Haven.
Well, let the record show this is the first time Paul and I have agreed on anything.
Yeah. Well, let the record show that I've always been wrong until now. So we'll see if that's a bad sign
Well,
for you,
it was
Joe.
a long time ago I didn't agree with Paul in the old days. I threatened to beat him up and he stopped.
No, I don't think that's quite how it happened. But you
I
did.
called him a yellow journalist.
Well, that was true. And you also got my car a bunch of times. All right. So, but now I walk, so you can't do much on that score. But you're riding your bike, Brian.
I came
McGrath.
down on my bike. It's out front.
All right. So thank you for joining us today on WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven. Thanks to our guests, Brian McGrath and Joel Schiavone. Thanks to the Miracle Man behind the controls, WNHH Station Manager Harry Droz. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.